child when my mom was pregnant with her second child, and we were returning to her home state of Nebraska to visit her parents. It was one of the last times she was going to be able to fly before she had what would have been my sister. And she was staying with her parents, and they never really got along so well. They had some ideological differences, we'll say, and so she actually left her parents' house that night to go and stay with her best friend, Janet Mesner. That night, Janet's cousin came to the house where they were staying. He's a Native American man. He was in an alcoholic blackout at the time and had actually ingested a powerful hallucinogen, peyote, and came in through the downstairs kitchen window and got a knife from the kitchen and killed both my mom and her best friend that night. I was in the house, but I don't remember anything about it. I guess when the police arrived and tried to talk to me about it, I was more interested in talking about rabbits. So, fast forward 18 years later, my father had always just told me that Randy Reeves was in prison for the rest of his life, and I didn't have to have any fear for him. He was never going to get out. So I didn't really think about it very much. I didn't even know he was on death row. No one had ever contacted me when the hearings came up. So I really was very ignorant of it, but I felt safe. I felt okay. So I get this phone call 18 years later, and it's my father, and he's got that tone in his voice, and I think, somebody's died, you know. And he said, they're going to try to kill the man that killed your mother. The execution date had been set, and I just cried, and I thought, oh God, no. You know, how could my mother's death lead to someone else losing their life? It just didn't make any sense to me. I knew it wasn't going to do anything to make me feel better. So my father and I returned to the state of Nebraska, and our goal was to ask for a clemency hearing. What we wanted was to get this man's sentence commuted to life in prison without parole. And at this point, the people that we're fighting for are two families, both Janet's family and Randy's family. They were kids together. They grew up together. Their families, they were family, you know. This was an intrafamilial tragedy, and we wanted to save these people from having to suffer the same tragedy that we had to suffer. So we met with the parole board, asking them to make a recommendation to the pardons board, which is the governor, the secretary of state, and the attorney general, just pleading with them to give us first, we just wanted a hearing to say, please give us a clemency hearing so that we can finally speak our piece before you put this man to death. Let us please try to plead with you and let you know our perspective. So the parole board, they actually did make a unanimous recommendation, which is very rare that there be this hearing held. So I know this is kind of a complicated thing, and if you guys get lost at any point, please feel free to ask any questions, because I want to make sure that this is clear. There was a hearing held to decide whether or not there was going to actually be a clemency hearing. They wanted to decide if they were even going to give us the opportunity to speak. It wasn't guaranteed to us. At this hearing, my father and I were not allowed to say anything. They actually read a letter by my aunt, my mother's sister, who supported the death penalty for this man. They voted against the hearing. They voted against clemency, and Randy was scheduled to be executed 2 days later on MLK Day. I felt at that moment that I had failed these families. I knew that they were going to have to go through what I went through, and it seemed patently unfair to me. 2 days later, or no, a day later, the very next day, a stay was granted based on an equal protection clause that had just been voted into the Nebraska state constitution. Because Randy was a minority, they did grant the stay based on that because there was a trial that he hadn't received. We also filed suit against the Pardons Board for violating our constitutional right to testify at the hearing. because of the Victims' Bill of Rights in Nebraska guarantees us that right to speak. And the decision that came back on that case, incidentally, was that we were no longer considered victims' family members because we were supporting the perpetrator of the crime. So with the stay in place, we found out a few months later there was going to be a retrial, the one that he hadn't received so many years before. And back home in Portland, about a year later, because these things take a long time, we were getting ready to return to what was going to be a 2 or 3 week trial where we were going to get the opportunity to speak finally. I got a phone call from Mr. Reeves' attorney, and she said, "Are you sitting down?" And when Paula asks if you're sitting down, you sit down immediately. And she said, "The DA's decided not to ask for the death penalty." And I couldn't really believe what I was hearing because this is a 1 in a million chance. He had decided to ask for a commutation of sentence. I was never an activist regarding the death penalty or really anything else. I was just an average girl going about my daily life when all of this happened. I've been educated about the death penalty through my own personal experience, about all the injustices, but what's important to me that people understand is exactly what Christine is talking about. You kill someone, their suffering ends. Everyone else that knows them and that's loved them, their suffering begins.